I'm Ajaire Parello and I'm a Cuddle Ambassador here in the Cuddle Studio today, and we're going to make a Cuddle zip-up bag today. This can be used to bring your supplies to class if you're taking a class. It could also be used for makeup. It's a nice size bag that's all made out of Quilting Cuddle. It can be made on either a serger or your regular sewing machine. Today we're going to be sewing it on this nice Bernina B790 Pro. But it's a great serger project as well. Let's talk about what we're going to need today. We will always need some rulers. We've got our OmniGrid ruler there. We want some soft and stable or some batting. Today I'm going to be using some batting. You probably want something like a soft and stable or batting just to give the structure of the bag. We use polyester thread. This is 100% polyester. This one's by Metler. We're going to use 3mm cording. That's just to make some nice piping on the edges of the bag. Also, some wash away tape. I like the Wash Away Wonder tape by Clover. The Schmetz 9014 stretch needle. Now remember, Quilting Cuddle is the same as all of our cuddles. It's a polyester fabric, so we're using 100% polyester thread, and it's a knitted backing. So we want to make sure we're using a stretch needle, which is specifically made for working with knits. That way we're not skipping any stitches. We'll also be using some Odif 505. That's a temporary adhesive, safe to use indoors, and it's nice because it's repositionable. So we'll be using that to kind of put everything together later. We may be using some Wonder clips. These are the jumbo size. An 18-inch zipper. We are going to be pressing today. Again, with Quilting Cuddle, you can press, so we'll talk about that. We love these boxed Clover flower head pins, and then a nice magnetic pin cushion to go with it. A rotary cutter, and some various writing implements, and as always, our Bianni stiletto. So in the pattern, we have all the lengths of all the strips we need to make. I like to cut everything out first so that we've got it all prepared. I used just the rotary cutter with Quilting Cuddle. I didn't bother using anything like the SAC blade that we normally do. We are going to be using 1/4-inch seam allowances for this pattern, but the Quilting Cuddle lends itself beautifully to that. So you have your strips for the body of the bag. Now we're going to lay them out in, a nice pleasing manner. I like to make sure that the nap, when I cut out, is heading in this left-right direction as we piece them, which means that you're cutting these pieces out of the width of the fabric. So you'll see there's a little bit of stretch here on this edge and no stretch on that edge. I just think it's nice for this bag that the nap is going to run down the length of the bag, which you'll see as we start to put this together. So as you're laying the strips out, you just want to make sure that you have your naps going in the same direction. You could certainly mark on the back of the fabric which way the nap is going so that you don't get confused later on. So, but that's completely up to your preference. So these are from the Wanderlust collection from Quilting Cuddle. This is the pink colorway, and I think it's so pretty. So we just took a few of these. We need 8 strips, and so we just took a few of these and put them together here in a nice pattern. I thought it just was such a fun little funky look to it. So all those naps are going in the correct direction. And now what we're going to do is piece these together. We're going to piece them the same way you would if you were doing some sort of cotton quilt. We're going to slide these ones to the side and just work with these 2 strips first. So I am going to flip this down. This is the side that we want to be working on. And we are going to pin a bit. You don't need to double pin quite as much as you do with, say, a Luxe Cuddle, but I do like to put a few pins in these because we are stitching across that width of fabric. There is some stretch, so your pieces can get skewed if you're not careful. The stretch is nice in Quilting Cuddle because it's subtle. There isn't a ton of stretch, but like just enough that you can match seams really nicely. You just have that freedom. But I like to pin to make sure that we're not going to get too far askew once we get this whole panel finished, because we're sewing all of these 8 strips together. I do like to do some of this diagonal pinning with a Quilting Cuddle. I found that it takes a few less pins, but you're still getting lots of real estate with the section that's pinned in there. And we're using the 1/4 inch seam allowance, so you do want to make sure those edges are pretty close together, or else you could have some slippage off the edge. And then I'll use a couple of double pins in here just to make sure things aren't slipping too much as we go along. I'll probably put one in the middle here too. There we go. So now let's go over and we're going to stitch this. We're using, I'm going to use a 3mm seam allowance for this Quilting Cuddle, and we'll see how this Bernina 790 does with that seam allowance for the 1/4 inch. I know where on this foot the 1/4 inch lands. There's a little marking on this foot. You could use a different foot that has different markings on it. Some of them, you know, the 1/4 inch foot. I am using a I'm using the walking foot for this because, actually, hold on, I'm going to lift this up again because I think the fabric got bunched. Yep, it got turned over under there. There we go. I'm using the walking foot because that does help with all cuddle, but it also just helps here with any stretching for this Quilting Cuddle. But they do have 1/4 inch walking feet, I suppose you would say, right? There's also a nice marking here at the 1/4 inch on this cutting table that comes with the 790. So it's nice to be able to line it up ahead of time, and then you're just reassuring with the stiletto that you're holding that 1/4 inch seam in place as you stitch. The nice thing about this bag pattern is that it's flexible. You can kind of make it any size you want. So once you learn this technique, you can make it bigger, you can make it smaller, but also if your panel ends up being a slightly different size than what the pattern says it should be, let's say your seam allowances are too big or too small, it's totally okay. The pattern will still work and you can just adjust. So let's see what this seam looks like. Take my pins out. Well, from the top, that 1/4 inch seam allowance looks pretty good. Let's look at it from the bottom. So it's a little bit shy of a 1/4 inch here. It's probably more like an 1/8, but that's okay. This end here got caught a little bit up in the stitching, but we could always fix that if we wanted to. It's so far on the edge that I'm not too worried about it, but we could come back and fix that later if we wanted to. So we are going to be pressing today. We're using this Oliso iron, which I love the Oliso irons. I also like to press these seams open. You could press them to the side, especially if you were serging, you could press them to the side. If you are going to press them to one side, I like to have the side, I like to press away from the nap, so the opposite direction of the nap, but that's your personal preference. I'm going to use a pressing cloth. Actually, on the backing here, I'm not going to use a pressing cloth. If I'm pressing from the front, I do like to use a pressing cloth, but I have found that I don't really need to on the backing of the Quilting Cuddle. I haven't come across any issues so far with that. So just giving it a good press to get that nicely pressed open. So those are the first two that are stitched together. Then you would move on and make sure, I continually make sure my naps are going in the same direction. You would go on and you would put all these together. I do have one that's already done. So we have this one here. Look at how pretty these look all together. I think they're just so nice. So our naps are all going in the same direction here. I think that Wanderlust is such a gorgeous collection. Okay, so now we are going to put this to the side for just a moment, and we're going to work on our tabs. So this has tabs on either end of the bag, so you can kind of grab it to work the zipper. So we've got one piece of Quilting Cuddle here. This is actually a solid in our Meet Me in the Garden collection. And I love that we've got solids in all of the Quilting Cuddle collections so that we can mix and match solids later. This is called Corsage. It's a really nice, pretty, rosy sort of pink that I think goes nicely with some of these other fabrics in the Wanderlust pink colorway. So I wanted something solid for those tabs, and so I thought this was going to be great. All I'm doing is I'm just sewing this long ends together at the 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then I like to actually press this open now. I usually would press it like that and press it down and then flip this right side out. I do have, I'm already done over here. So there are 2 tabs from this one. We just cut it in half, so then you have your 2 tabs, and then I just folded them over and kind of pressed them down. So they will be the little tabs on the edges of the bag. So we have those done. Now we also want to make some piping. So we have our 3mm cording, and then we have strips for piping. So we take these little strips. This is also from Meet Me in the Garden. I thought this was really pretty, and it goes reasonably well with the specific fabric that I'm putting up near the zipper. And so all we're going to do is just sort of pin in place, and we're wanting to pin that cording inside, but we're also just trying to get these edges to match. So I'm sort of ignoring the cording at this point. I'm just trying to make sure that we're not skewing the actual quilting cuddle as we go along. So we don't, if I didn't pin, then we might pull this edge longer than this edge. So if I do pin a little bit as we go here, we at least know that we have the quilting cuddle folded in half correctly, that nothing is pulling on either side, on either end there. So we're matching this end now. So we got some nice pins in there. We are going to switch over to the zipper foot. If your machine has a cording foot, a really good cording foot, we could use that, and the cording foot just lets that cord go right under a groove in there. But I'm going to use a zipper foot, which does the same thing. It lets us get real close to that cording. So let me just switch this out now. So we've got that 4D foot on, and now we're going to move the needle over to, so you can move the needle not in the middle, and it will tell you on this machine. See how it's red there? It's saying if you try to drop it there, you're going to hit the metal. So it's nice that when you select your needles, you know exactly what's going to happen with this machine. So now let's start our stitching. Sometimes you gotta, let's lift this up. This is actually the AccuFeed foot, D is, but I wasn't using that system. I think I might do it though. Let's see. Let's see what happens when we try to use it. Let's use it with the dual feed. I think it's going to help everything move nicer. We have, with the Bernina, it has specific feet for the system, so you have to have the right foot on there. And since this zipper foot is classified as D for dual feed, we can use that system with it. It does help with the cuddle in the same way a walking foot does. It really gives us some freedom of mobility. I stop right shy of the edge, and then I am going to lift the presser foot, turn it, and I'm just going to stitch across right here. I want to have one spot where the cording has been caught. So you guys can see here that if I pull on the cording there, it's not going to go anywhere. If I pull on the cording here, it would probably go all the way through. So I don't want to like accidentally lose the cording. So I just do on one end. I like to have a little bit on either side so you know you've got plenty of cording there, but I do try to attach it at one side. Let me do the other one really quick because we do have one for each end. And you saw how quickly that goes. Now we have our 2 pieces of cording. So we are going to attach the cording to the short ends of this piece that we have. Now remember, we've got all of our cuddle going the same direction, and I just like to double check that even the piping I want the nap to go in the same direction. So you can see this is wider than what we need, but that's what we want. We wanted a little bit of leeway so that that part in the beginning where it was a little tripped up and you see a tiny little nest under there, that's going to be outside of even our seam allowance. We're going to end up just trimming that off. So it works out really well here. I'm going to pin each end, you know, the way we need to pin. I lie everything down, make sure it's where it wants to sit. We're not tugging anything. We have room to play here, so I take advantage of that. I am doing some diagonal pinning. I'm going to try to sort of pin these seam allowances open from the bottom, but if they end up getting closed, that's okay too. The nice thing about the nap with the cuddle is that because it's a little bit thicker than like a traditional quilting cotton, you don't have to worry too much about which way, the flatness of the seams, because you're going to kind of feel them either way. If we're doing a whole bunch of piecing that's going to end up hitting at the same time, you want those seams to make sure they're being pressed open, but in this case, we have some freedom. So now we're going to stitch this using that same cording foot. So actually, before we go and stitch this, I want to just attach the cording to the other side at the same time. That way we can just, so remember it's going the other way here, but that way we can do all the stitching at once. All right, so that is going. So see here, we had a little trouble when we started, so that can be outside of the stitching. We're just going to trim that off at the end, and then we lay this nicely down. I'm just going to pin all of this in place the same way we did on the other side. And I said cording foot, but again, if you do not have your cording foot and you want to use a zipper foot like this, it works great. So I'm going to use the zipper foot again. I mentioned that this pattern, there's some freedom as you go to make sure you're trimming everything nicely, but it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. As you can see, there's more than a 1/4 inch seam allowance here where I tucked that cording in, but that's okay. On this edge, I'm going to do more than a 1/4 inch seam allowance so that way we have that cording really nice and snug in there. And you'll see that when we trim everything at the end, it'll all be just perfect. So I'm going to try to match that line that we already stitched on the cording. The nice thing about the Quilting Cuddle is that it will kind of hide any stitching. So the stitches shouldn't be visible later, even if they are quote unquote showing. They shouldn't be visible because we'll just fluff up that cuddle around it. So we're just using the stiletto to make sure we're not getting any bunching. The zipper foot goes just to the right of that cording, tucks the cording in place really nicely. And I am going to back stitch here. There we go. And then we'll flip to the other side and just complete that stitching. Make sure nothing is bunching. There we go, just like that. I like to make sure the thread is tucked under. There we go. Okay. Let's just all right, so let's take a look. All right, so see, it's a little bit more than a 1/4 inch seam allowance, but that's totally fine. Most of these seams are pretty good there. Same with over here. We're pretty good over here. So now what we're going to do is this bag is going to end up coming together on the top with a zipper, and then we'll box the bottom. So we are going to add zipper panels. So let me check the direction of my nap. So my naps are going in that direction. These zipper panels have the naps going away from the zipper. So I would put one on this side and one on this side. So that way, as the top of the bag falls, those have the naps going down like that away from the zipper. So this print I thought was just so cute. It has those little tigers and some leopards in there. So we are going to stitch this down on top of the piping, just through the layers here, not through the middle. And then once we're all done with this part, we'll trim things up a little bit. So this is where we have the freedom to make it the size we want to make it, instead of worrying too much about that seam allowance there, okay? And again, this piece you can tell is a little bit wider than we've done the bag, but that's okay because we are going to trim. So it's done that way on purpose. So that way, if your 1/4 inch seams were a little bit small, everything would still work out in the end. We have this piece a little bit longer than it needs to be by design. We know that Quilting Cuddle can move on you, and so it's nice to have that built into the pattern, that, you know, we just have a little bit of extra freedom on a pattern like this. Just wanted to double check that I had my nap going in the direction I want it to go. Nap at this point is totally personal preference. It's what you want it to do. So I'm going to pin both sides just like we did for the last step. That way we can do all our stitching over there. We're still going to keep on that same foot because we want to get that cording is still in there, right? And if you're using your cording foot, you would still have the cording foot on, and just as you go across, you would have the cording in the groove of that foot. So instead of in the groove, my zipper foot is just going to go past the cording. Goes right up to it. It allows us to get closer to it than we would be able to with a regular foot. All right, just kind of getting all these pins in here. This is a relatively quick project. You can use this zipper bag style to make it your own. You could do something different than just the strips. You can make the strips wider or narrower. That panel here can be made lots of different ways. So it's kind of fun that once you've got this technique down, you can do lots of things with it. stretch that fabric. There we go. So now if you feel like the fabric is bunching, always feel free to lift that presser foot. And remember, we do have the freedom with this fabric to trim at the end. So if it starts to bunch, we can just remove pins and more will hang off the end, but that's okay because we're trimming it anyway. So this one does not have to be exact. I'm only using the pins because I don't want the fabric itself to really pull a lot and actually stretch, because that can skew and then the bag will look skewed. It's different than if it just shifts a little bit. You can work that in or trim it off at the end. It's a little different than if the whole thing starts to get skewed. Just make sure that looks nice. Flip to the other side and we will do the other end. Let's see here. Okay. Okay. So now you can see we've got our piping and our zipper edges here. I'm going to press. I like to press the piping kind of away from the zipper panel like this. I think that's going to look nicest. So we will press this real quick. So that means the seam allowance is getting pressed up toward that zipper panel. You can press from the back or the front. I am going to press from the front in this case. I don't want to press the cording too much, the cording itself, so I'm kind of pressing to the side of it. So I don't want to flatten the cording completely, I just want to get that seam allowance pressed nicely. There we go, that looks good there. If you wanted to, you could top stitch here. Because we like to have this as a potential serger project as well, we didn't include it, but that's, again, personal preference. You can embellish it any way you want. You could do some nice top stitching there to hold that seam allowance in place, but I found that with the bag itself, it works just fine without that. If you have a tailor's clapper, you can also use that to kind of help press that. I'm going to turn this heat up just a little bit. I found it's a little low using this flannel for a pressing cloth. All right, so now we have the cording has been nicely pressed. Everything looks great. We are going to attach some batting. So what we're going to do is I'm going to get my paper. This is just to handle some overspray. We don't want that OD 505 to spray onto any of the surrounding things. So I'm going to grab my OD. We're just going to spray around. Oh, this one's not open yet. I'm going to grab my one that's open. This one's been opened. So all I'm doing here is I want to make sure this is nice and flat because I'm going to put my batting right down on it And so just going to spray so everything stays really nicely. We're doing this before we trim it down so that way the batting will be trimmed to the same size. And if you have soft and stable, this is where you would use soft and stable, or even a fusible fleece if that's what you wanted to use. We just really like the soft and stable product. So I'm trying to stretch my batting a little bit just to fit the piece a little bit better so it doesn't quite fill out that zipper thing there. Maybe I'll just do it on that side. Oops. That got bunched up. Here, let's do it from this side. This is the nice thing about the 505 is that it is repositionable. So if you see things that are starting to bunch a little bit, you can just work it a second time. See, all the stuff is kind of sticking together, but it just releases really nicely. So there is quite a bit of forgiveness with it. All right, so the batting is not long enough to hit this zipper edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut another piece that will fit within the other zipper panel. I just didn't cut it quite long enough in the first place. So I didn't cut it according to the pattern instructions. I just kind of grabbed what I had here. So I'm just trying to, because we're going to secure this on here, I just want to make sure it's right before we move to the next steps. Don't want any bunching in there. Pull this. So this basically, this batting is going to stop at that zipper, at the zipper panel, and then I will put a small piece right there under the zipper panel. So I'm just going to cut a little piece, just a little strip, and we'll add it right to the edge there. And because that piping, it will be in between, it's not like it's going to feel super bumpy there or anything. There's already a relatively bulky seam there, so we can hide it pretty well. If you would cut your piece to the correct sizing in the first place, you wouldn't have this error. This is just because I was rushing to cut, so don't make my mistakes. All right, that's a little bunched up there. I'm just going to lift this up and reposition this first because I do see that little bit of a bunch there, and I don't want that to translate to the top of the fabric. There we go. There. That 505 spray just has saved me more than once, let me tell you. Being able to lift up and readjust is everything. It really helps so much. All right, there we go. So now again, I'm going to move this to the side for a minute. Again, this is a time where you could top stitch right here, and that would secure the batting, or soft and stable or fusible fleece would already be fused, so you wouldn't have to worry about that, but just it would secure everything together. Okay, so now we've got this piece and we have our batting or soft and stable. We have something that is kind of holding it all together. So we're going to take our lining. Again, I'm using this corsage color from the Meet Me in the Garden Cuddle, from the Quilting Cuddle. I just thought that would be nice to go along with this. So the nap doesn't really matter because we are talking about the inside of the bag here. But what I'm going to do is I want the lining and this whole panel to end up the same size at the end. So I'm going to put this piece down. I cut this piece according to the pattern, which is purposely cut a little bit bigger so that we can do this step. So I'm going to put this down now on top of this. We are not fusing these together. We're not going to be using the 505 and spraying these together. We're going to keep them separate for now. We're just trying to sort of line things up nicely so that we have them approximately the same size. Now it's okay if the lining is a little bit bigger. Sometimes you want the lining of a bag a little bit bigger so it has room to play inside. So I'm really just going to be cutting these ends together, and I'm going to leave the lining a little bit longer on the edges there. So I'm going to take my ruler and my rotary cutter, and I'm just going to cut through. I'm also going to cut that cording end there just to trim this stuff up here. Get through that cording. There we go. Cut that piece off. All right, and then I'm going to reach across and cut a little bit more. I'm not trying to make it perfectly square. I'm just trying to kind of get everything to be about the same size here. This can just be tossed. I'm going to turn and I'll do the same thing with the other side. That lining is still underneath. Still have it down there. This did shift a little bit, so I'm just going to make sure the lining is still underneath there. And then we'll just trim this up here. You can see that my panel did skew a little bit. It kind of curves in that way. But that's okay because this bag, as I've said several times now, is very forgiving. So I'm just trying to trim it up now so that when we go to put everything together, it'll all work nicely. I am just going to vacuum those sides really quick since I did just trim. Want to clean up any of that nap that's fallen off. Okay. Back there. All right, so now I am going to move this lining to the side again. So now we're going to talk about the zipper. We've got our 18-inch zipper. And just taking it out of its package, just a regular zipper. You can certainly use some zipper tape and some fancy zipper pulls for this. Sometimes it's nice to have the pulls, 2 pulls on a bag. But this is just your basic zipper. I am going to just press it really quick. This isn't a metal tooth zipper, so I don't want to get the teeth too hot. I don't want them to melt. But I've got a relatively low iron as it is because I'm working with Cuddle. So just trying to straighten it out a little bit before we go to sew with it. There we go. There we go. Nice and flat now. So we are going to attach this zipper to one end of the zipper panel. And we're going to go right sides together. Because the zipper is longer than our panel, at this point we're not worried about opening it up. We're not worried about stitching over the head. We're really just going to put this down here. This is where I use the wash away Wonder Tape. It really keeps everything nice and straight. This piece is a little bit dry there because of just the outside had lots of Cuddle dust on it. So I cut that part off. So now it's this edge of the zipper. It's going to go down there. So I'm going to put the Wonder Tape on the zipper. I like to put it on the zipper so that we know exactly where it's going. Just trying to. This is the Wonder Tape is working backwards from the way it normally does. Normally you peel the tape off after, but like I said, this was in the bag with a bunch of Cuddle, so it got some Cuddle dust on it. So that's okay. Flip it around right there. There we go. We're really just trying to keep everything in place, so just pull that off. All right, so we have the Wonder Tape on there, and we're going to use that to stick this edge right down. Actually, I am going to trim up that edge first. So I'm just going to put this to the side. It has the Wonder Tape on it, but it'll be fine. I do want to just trim that edge. I'm just trimming the batting, so I'm not even going to use the ruler or anything. I just want to get that trimmed. I didn't want to trim it with the lining underneath because I wanted to keep the lining a little bit longer, but I do want that edge trimmed up. Okay, so this is the other edge now, but it's still the same. So I am just going to be pressing this down with that Wonder Tape. I'm going to give it a quick press with the iron too, just because that does kind of help set the Wonder Tape a little bit. This is wash away, so it does disappear when you wash. And now that's pretty secure in there, and I'm also just going to add a couple pins to make sure that the batting is going to stay in place too. We did use the Odif on the batting, but I might not have gotten exactly to the edges. So just going to put a few pins to hold everything really well. And then of course we still have that zipper foot over here. So I'm going to utilize the zipper foot to our advantage. If you were using a cording foot, you could keep that on and you could keep this, put the zipper into the cording groove. It works the same way. So if on your serger you don't have a cording foot but you do have a zipper foot, or vice versa, you can use them somewhat interchangeably. So you're wanting to get close to the zipper teeth, but not too close. I might be cutting it a little bit close here, so we'll see when we're done. You just always want to make sure your zipper is still going to work, function properly. So let's see if that's going to allow us to open it. I'm a little close, but let's see. As long as it opens, okay, so we're good. So it's okay to be that close. As long as it'll open, we're okay. And we made it through the batting really nicely. There we go. So now I am going to put my lining right side down on top of, so we're now sandwiching that zipper in the batting. I mean in between the lining and the main fabric, that zipper panel. So I am going to flip this over because I want to stitch from this side so I can see my previous stitches, because I'm going to try to match them. So I'm just going to make sure the lining, I can see it from this side, so it's not exactly lining up right to the very edge. I'm going to give it a little bit of leeway so that I can see it, because that's all I care about here. Remember, I left the lining a little bit longer on purpose so that we could do this kind of thing. Just want to be able to see that lining because it's a little bit bulky here, and I don't want the lining slipping. You could also use another piece of the Wonder Tape right here if you wanted to. I'm not going to, just because I know we have a nice looking seam here from the front, and I'm less worried about the lining. But you certainly could do that there as well. This wash away Wonder Tape doesn't gum up your needle or anything, so it's okay to use it pretty liberally. All right. Okay. So now we're stitching through all the layers here. And all I'm doing now is I'm just going to try to follow that line of stitching that I already did. So I'm just trying to match up, even just to the right of it. It doesn't have to be, certainly doesn't have to be to the left of it because we're already close to that zipper, but I want to try to aim for being right on. There we go. So now our lining would go on the inside, and we just make sure that that is still going to open nicely. Again, this is a place where you could top stitch if you really wanted to, but this zipper does stay in place really nicely, so I'm not worried about that, doing that at this point. So I am going to put some more wash away wonder tape here, and then we're going to line up just that edge. I'm not worried about the lining right now. I'm just doing this zipper to this edge here. So we'll use more of the wash away wonder tape. I like to put it on the zipper side so that I can control it a little bit more. The zipper tape doesn't stretch at all the way Cuddle does. So you know it's going to be on there nice and securely. And then you can work with the Cuddle to meet that. So I am trying to match up the Cuddle on the ends here to its partner on the other side here. Just trying to keep them even. And then, just like we always do, kind of do the middle, work our way out. I'm pinching it. We're only working with that main zipper panel and the batting. And now just putting a few pins in there to make sure nothing is going to slip. Once again, we'll go to our machine and stitch close to that zipper. You do want to make sure your lining is out of the way from the other side. You don't want to be catching the lining yet. We'll do that in another step. We're just working with the main zipper panel and the zipper and the batting. So now once again, I'm just going to make sure that this zipper is functional. Yep, it works great. Here we go. What I like to do is I like to line it up like this and then pull it through because I know that corner is where we're wanting everything to meet. Let me get this pin in this corner and then I'll show you what we did. Because we're going to stitch from the other side just like we have before. All right, so if you did not have your zipper pull on yet, these two zipper tapes could be separate. And you're basically just putting the lining on top of the main. And it's only bunched here because this is connected, which is fine because that zipper is away from the lining and the main. So we know we have these edges here. If you didn't have your zipper connected, it would be a flat rectangle. And all we're doing is just what we did before where we're getting this lining. We want it to peek out a little bit. We're going to end up stitching along that same line that we already did for the zipper. And again, you could use your wash away wonder tape here. I just feel like everything's already pretty stable under there, so it's not totally necessary. So then we'll get sewing this with that zipper foot. All right, and we're just trying to follow the line that we already stitched. Do like to just double check that we've got the right things under our needle. Don't want to be stitching anything else accidentally. Don't want any other fabric hanging over or doing anything weird, so just double checking as we go that everything is just as it should be. All right. so now let's flip it out so the lining is quote unquote inside. This is going to be so pretty with these pinks. I just think this is going to be a really nice bag. And then we'll zip that up. So now it's starting to look like a cute little bag, right? Our zipper looks great in there. This is the exterior of the bag. The lining, as you see, is on the inside. We'll end up stitching it all together. So this is coming together really nicely. Okay, so now we have our bag. I'm going to we're going to put these zipper pull tabs. I am going to place it right here, and then I want to just get it so that it's going to stay in place. So I am just going to stitch over these. For this side, we need to pull that zipper pull down out of the way of it, and then you can use a safety pin here if you wanted to keep these edges together. I'm just going to sort of pin them together. If you didn't have your zipper pull on there yet, if you're using tape, this is the time to put it on, and you would put it on just, you know, a little past here. But I am going to baste these in place on these two ends before we do the next steps, because I don't want them to, this is what I'm going to do with this one. Because that wants to separate there, I find the best thing to do is to pin it on one side through the layers and then pin it on the other side, and that's actually going to help it to stick together there. And these are those little zipper pull tab things that we made in the very beginning. So I'm going to stitch these on. I'm leaving the opening here, like I'm not stitching through all the layers yet. I'm just stitching through the lining there and the top here across this edge. And I'm not trying to do any specific seam allowance right now. I'm really just basting the tab in place so that we don't have to think about it later. And I'm making sure those teeth are nicely together. All right, let's see if we caught the whole thing. Yep, and we've got the teeth together. So I can take that pin out. Now we have basted those teeth together there. Let's put this one under the needle as well. Just get everything so we know it's going to stay together. We don't want to be thinking about those tabs in the next step. So if we baste them on, then we know they're in place. And those are what we're going to use later if we're opening the bag. So now we can trim the zipper. Just trim the rest of that zipper. Because it's already stitched down, it's not going to open on either end. Make sure nothing is beneath you. We're just trying to get that out of the way for the next steps. All right, now we're going to flip. We have it opened a little bit so we can turn it later, but we're going to flip this so that the lining is on the right side. So we're going to pull it through, just being careful where my hand is here that the zipper teeth there don't get pulled apart, because it is just being held on by some basting stitches. I left the stitch length the same length as our normal stitching has been, so I didn't open it all the way up to a basting stitch. I'm just calling it a basting stitch that we're holding everything in place. So what I'm doing now is I'm lining up inside the bag. I'm trying to make sure that everything is nice and smooth in there. What we're going to be doing is stitching down these sides. Now and we're stitching all these layers together, which is quite a few layers, but it's going to come out really nice in the end. If you are using your serger, this is like where the serger is going to shine, because it's just going to trim off any edge here. You can keep that knife down if you want, and it's going to make a beautiful edge here. If you are not using a serger, you could bind in the end if you're concerned about anything showing here. The nice thing about Cuddle is that it's not going to unravel. So you don't have to cover any of these extra seams on the inside. Nothing is going to happen to them. So it's really up to you and what your preference is. So we're doing on the regular machine, so you'll see what it looks like in the end and you can make the decision for yourself. Okay, I'm just trying to make sure that zipper is relatively straight across. We're going to pin everything in place, and actually this I think is where I'm going to use some clips. So let me grab my clips and we'll clip this edge in place. And again, we're going through the main layers, the batting, and the lining. So we're clipping through all those layers. I am going to switch back to the walking foot because I don't need that narrow foot anymore, the zipper one or the cording one, depending on what you're using. And I do want to make through all the layers really nicely, and the walking foot does a great job of that. I'm just trying to pinch everything down, make sure I've got all the layers through. This does get a little bit thick in here, so you're just really going to want to make sure you got it all. And we can adjust things as we go. Let's just get the clips in place and start our sewing. I know I keep saying it, but this project is very forgiving. I'm going to do both sides. And in the middle here, remember, we're also going to stitch permanently that pull tab. And you do want to make sure your zipper has been opened so that you have a way to open it up later. Otherwise, you're sewing these sides down and then you have no hole to turn through. Just trying to get some clips through here. All right, so let's go over to the sewing machine. I'm going to take this 4D foot off. I'm going to put the walking foot back on. I'm going to put up this dual feed system. I'm missing a foot here for the dual feed for regular stitching, which is why I'm not using the dual feed. If I had the regular dual feed foot like this, I would be using it on this machine because it's great. We are just missing that specific foot. So I'm using a walking foot, which works fine for this machine. And this is, let's see what number this walking foot is. I want to make sure I'm selecting the correct, there we go, number 50. So the foot is number 50, and then technically I can stitch where the needle is, but remember I moved that needle over, so we're wanting to change the position of the needle back to its normal center position. And I'm just going to grab a small scrap of fabric because I want to make sure, I'm going to grab a small scrap of fabric here, and I'm just going to, once I change feet, I like to just do at least one line of stitching to make sure everything's working the way it's supposed to work. Yep, looks great. Okay, I am going to up the stitch length here. We've got 2.5 for the standard stitch length. I'm going to go all the way up to 3.5 because we are stitching over a lot of bulk here. So in the layers, I can see that my main is a little bit further over. I am going to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance here because with the Quilting Cuddle, of course, you can use the 1/4 inch seam allowance, but in this project, we've got a lot of bulk in here, and so I want to use the full width of this presser foot to kind of manage that. So I'll do a couple of stitches, and I'm going to back stitch 2, so we really know that stitch is secure. And then we're just going to go slow, raise the presser foot if you see any bunching, and I'll continue on. I'm helping to take some of that weight off by lifting things up a bit. Okay. Just want to make sure that you've got that zipper pull tab in place there. If you want to, you can backstitch over that zipper just to give extra security. The zipper tab kind of helps with that too, that pull tab. Go. So let's clip that. All right, so we're gonna look in, make sure we've got all of, so you can see, we've got a seam allowance in there, all that fabric was caught, the zipper tab was caught, the batting, everything. So you just want to be sure of that because we can always go back and fix things if we need to. So using the 1/2 inch seam allowance there really helps. Okay. And of course, as you're approaching the cording, you can kind of feel it under there. You might use the stiletto to really make sure you're getting past the hump of the cording. There we go. So let's see. Okay. So now we've got our little, feels like a fluffy pillow of some sort. So I'm checking here. So it's a smaller seam allowance there, but it is still pretty steady and the fabric was grabbed the whole way across. So that's fine for me. I'm not concerned as long as the fabric was pulled through. I'm going to turn this right side out. We are going to box this, but I want to check everything before we go ahead and do that. So let's pull this out. This actually at this point looks like a giant tissue, like one of those little tissue pouches that you'd have. And you could certainly leave it that way if you wanted to. But we want to box those corners to make it extra cute and fluffy. So we like to make sure, you know, the zipper's functioning, those seams, everything's been stitched nicely. Nothing is askew, right? Everything looks good. So now we're going to go ahead and box those corners. And that'll give us the real shaping that we're looking for this project. So as you can see, as we've gone along, it really was adjustable. We weren't using specific measurements for some of these things because we wanted you to have the freedom for any fabric that slipped or anything like that. We don't want anybody to be stressed for this project because you're really just making it whatever size works for you. And so we used a 1/2 inch seam allowance here. We used about 1/2 inch for the zippers, and then we used 1/4 inch when we were just doing the Quilting Cuddle panel. So it's really forgiving. Now we're going to box the corners, and the way we do that is we're going to do 2 inches in the corners. So let me grab my ruler. We're doing a 2-inch corner, and this will seem scary at first because we're cutting it. So we are going to cut a square there. What I am going to do is mark it and then use the scissor because I don't want to cut too far in. And if I use the rotary cutter, I'm afraid I will cut in too far. And we're going through all the layers here. So we'll use our Karen K. Buckley scissors. We're cutting through all the layers. Just like that. There we go. So before I cut the others, let me show you what we're going to do with this. First, I'm going to vacuum it. I like to keep things tidy, so I will vacuum really quickly. This little piece that pulled up. Cut that off. Okay, then what we're going to do here is we have this seam here, and we're going to take that center seam and let me show you. There's a crease here from where this has been lying flat. It'll be easier if I show you with a pin. So I'm going to pin right in here on this edge. See, I put a pin there. So now that point there is now going to match up with this seam here. I am flattening out the seam. I'm actually going to sew from the top so that we can see that seam and keep it flat. We certainly could put it straight down because it will be down later, but for this purpose, because it is such a tight, it is kind of tight in there, I'm going to pinch it and try to have it flat. So I'm putting 3 pins in there. You could certainly use clips here too. And then we will stitch across. Here I will probably use closer to a 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch, between maybe a 3/8 of an inch here. And we're stitching across that bottom. That is going to give us the nice boxed look that we want. So I may put like a double pin through here because just through the thickness, make sure nothing slides on us as we're doing this. I'm saying thickness. It's really not that thick here, but I just want to make sure we're getting through all those layers. So I am going to back stitch. And then I'll use the stiletto to make sure. Again, I'm using about a 3/8 of an inch here, just to have something to grab to and make sure that we've gone through all the layers, but not such a teeny tiny seam allowance that maybe a 1/4 inch might be a little small. Okay. Take out the pins. So if I flip this back out, there you can see now we have a corner. That's what we call it, a boxed corner, and it'll help the bag sort of stand up. See that? So let's do the others so we can see what that's going to look in the end. Normally you would mark all 4 corners at once. I just kind of wanted to give you a heads up to what we were doing with this inside. So I'm going to mark, and then we'll cut all of them with, again, you can cut with the rotary cutter if you want to. It makes me nervous cutting through all those layers with the rotary cutter and accidentally going in too far. So I think it's a little easier to use a good set of scissors. And typically you would mark your 2 inches from this corner here. From the stitching out. Here I did not do that, so I'm going to make it consistent. So it's going to be kind of an oblong shape. You'll see when we turn it out. But just to be consistent, I'm going to mark the 2 inches from the edge of the fabric. But when you do, you would want to mark from the stitching, the serging, the stitching, whichever you did. We'll see what it looks like when we're done with this. As I cut each of these, I do want to just cut one at a time and stitch it. I don't want to cut them all and just have the bag flopping around. I like to kind of stitch them all at once. Stitch them as I go. It helps keep track of all the layers if you're only working on one side at a time. Otherwise, things can get a little bit too skewed if you're moving the bag all the way around. So I'm going to flip this around. It worked well to stitch from the top so I could control that seam allowance there. Let me do that again. Just put these other pins to hold everything in place. Here's our our second corner. Under. All right. Some nice looking corners. So now we're starting to see some shaping of the bag here. So now, again, if you wanted to, you could, before you cut these corners, you could put some binding on this end, trim it up, put some binding on this end, cut it out, and then you could bind along this end. So if you were concerned about having any open seams in here, you could do that. And in classes, we may do that if we're not using a serger. A serger, everything is nice and neat and looks great, but it might be nice to kind of bind these edges and then bind the corners. But you want to bind the short end first before you cut so that you're not trying to jam in here once you've done that. So just a tip that if you want to have a binding, that's one way you could do it if you want the nice clean insides. You'll see when we're done that it's going to be fine either way. And again, you could wash this bag. There's not going to be any unraveling. There's no issue with having exposed seams on the quilting cuddle. Before I flip it outside, I'm just going to trim any of these little threads because we do have some exposed seams. I just want to make sure it at least looks decent. I don't like threads hanging off. I don't mind the exposed seams, but just kind of trim any of the little loose threads, and then we'll flip it. I do think this corsage color of the Quilting Cuddle on the inside works really nicely with this Wanderlust pink collection. It goes well with this print right here, and so I feel like it sort of ties in with the collection that way. Okay, so let's zip it up. Now, depending on what you used for your stabilizer, remember, I just used batting. I didn't use soft and stable. I did not use a fusible fleece. So it's a little bit softer. It's a little bit less structured. If you use something like a fusible fleece or a soft and stable, you're going to have more structure in there. But the method is the same. You're going to do the same thing either way. So now you've got your lining on the inside. And again, right here at the top, there are no exposed seams. It's not until you get to the bottom that anything's exposed. So really, it's completely up to you whether or not you want to bind those seams if you haven't serged this project. And then you can just put your notions inside here. It carries quite a lot. And again, with the soft and stable or something structured, it'll really hold on to things really well. And then you've got a really nice sized kit to bring with you to class or to have as, a makeup bag or a dop kit. And that's our Quilting Cuddle bag. As you can see, it turned out super cute with the panels and all these different Wanderlust quilting cuddles. If you enjoyed this project, we have lots of other videos out in the Cuddle Studio that I'd love you to check out.